As you move through the opening in the back of the cavern, you feel a draft coming. You light up your torch and wave it around and try to point it down towards the sloping passage going deeper beneath the earth. But as you look down, you realize the light cannot pierce the unending darkness ahead of you. It's no bottomless pit or magical darkness, your drow companion explains. It's simply too deep for the light to pass all the way through. What you found is an entrance to a whole other world buried beneath your feet. A dark and dangerous world, but one home to as much diversity of life as the surface world. The Underdark. How many times have you heard a similar passage? Perhaps not as many these days, because we are just so familiar with the idea in fantasy and TTRPG circles. The Underdark, the cavernous underworld hidden beneath our feet, which makes you question how the surface world doesn't just collapse on top of it, given how many holes there are underneath. Maybe whoever made it thought of making load-bearing walls and pillars. It feels so bizarre that such a seemingly specific idea became so ubiquitous in fantasy. But maybe if we delve into its specific examples and history, we will learn why and how it became what it is. And hey, a quick note, we are now officially in the YouTube partnership program, which means channel memberships and super chats are available on the channel, and they are great ways of supporting this endeavor if you like what I'm doing. Among others, linked in the video description below. And shout out to our first channel member, Attake585. I hope that's how you pronounce it. But enough of that, enough about that, and let's get back to the video. Probably the most famous example and the trope codifier is Faerun's Underdark. The first explicit appearance of the Underdark was in an adventure made by Gary Gygax himself in 1978 for the original world of Greyhawk, or Oath apparently, and would later be adapted for the Forgotten Realms in the 1980s when Ed Greenwood's original world would be featured as one of the main settings of D&D. I could go into depth into both of those separately because of course they have their own separate geography and history, but let's be honest here. Only the absolute grog nerds still remember Greyhawk, and I love them, but between these two, they are very similar and most viewers will recognize Faerun's Underdark better. The idea started simply as a planet-wide dungeon, because it might be a shocker to people playing Dungeons & Dragons today, but Dungeons & Dragons used to be pretty important to the game. Ages ago, dungeon crawling was almost all they did, so as a natural expansion of the idea, Gary Gygax invented the ultimate dungeon. And the idea really took off with people. Since the Underdark was more popularized by the Forgotten Realms, it really codified staples of the kind of setting it was. It has lightless, cavernous depths. It has fungal forests with noxious spores. It has, most importantly, a number of very iconic inhabitants. The drow, everyone's favorite sadomasochists. The mind flayers. They've got tentacles, you know, quite shocking. Things like bullets, ettercaps, kuo-toa, who make their own gods. Faerun's Underdark famously has 3 layers called Upper Dark, Middle Dark, and Lower Dark, which are exactly what it says on the tin. And the layers increase in hostility as you go deeper and deeper. The Forgotten Realms and their Underdark really created what Underdark is like in our popular imagination. When most people try to design their own D&D worlds, as long as they're not just going for a generic fantasy world, they try to make their own spin on all the famous fantasy elements. So when Keith Baker made Eberron for an old D&D contest, he had to include the Underdark in some variation, because including all the popular elements of D&D was one of the conditions. He had to make it his own. And thus was born Khyber. Khyber is more than just Eberron's Underdark. Like everything else in this world, it's a little different. Eberron actually gives us an origin story for it. Khyber was one of the progenitor dragons, the 3 cosmic entities whose bodies literally physically made up the world of Eberron. Khyber was the dragon below, and its body was trapped beneath Eberron and became the cavernous depths of the Underdark. However, because of its supernatural origins, it is more than just caves. Khyber is almost a separate plane, being somewhere between the physical realm and the infernal spaces from which the fiends originate. You will find more fiends and aberrations there than any drow or dwergar, especially since Eberron's drow are completely different. It is much less of just a planet-wide dungeon, and more of a realm of creation of its own. And I feel this should be more common, but you will see why in a moment. Plenty of other D&D worlds have their own Underdarks that mostly follow the basic ideas of the Forgotten Realms Underdark. A beer that was largely invented as the new additions to the Forgotten Realms and in the 4th edition brought their own Underdark with it, and when it got merged with Toril. And we have so very little on it, and what we do know seems very similar to Toril's. Exandria, because it was created to be Critical Role's basic fantasy world, also has its own Underdark, which will look very familiar. Mushrooms and drow and the mind flayers, with no disrespect meant for Matt Mercer or the others. It's not very original. Golarion from Pathfinder, though not technically D&D, also has its own Underdark, only now it's called the Darklands. But overall it fits with the tropes of the Underdark to a T, right down to the 3 layers. What I do find interesting about it is that Golarion does give us an origin myth about the banished evil god called Rovagug. Apparently, once he was sealed deep underground, he wouldn't sit still, so he would keep moving around and digging through the earth, creating these cavernous realms that people have come to live in since. The end result is still Underdark, with serial numbers filed off, but I do like a good myth. It kind of becomes more notable when a D&D world that doesn't have an Underdark. Athos of the Dark Sun setting doesn't have a big sprawling Underdark, only small sections with ruins of the Green Age or the Undercity of Justanal. Really, the surface of Athos is dangerous enough as it is. Any under-Athos would probably have to be just instantly lethal to anything alive. Kryn of Dragonlance also has no unified Underdark, with only small, isolated places where it makes sense. But what if I told you that the idea of the Underdark exists even outside of D&D and TTRPGs? Much like with Golarion, it should come as no surprise that Warhammer Fantasy, so heavily inspired by TTRPGs, has its own version of the Underdark, though it is neither natural nor supernatural. There are 2 major factions that operate under the ground of malice. First, the dwarves created something called the Underway, a network of tunnels spanning the world, originally created to connect various dwarven kingdoms. And then came the Skaven, one of those, the ratmen who just digging everywhere and creating the massive under-empire that occasionally bubbles up, spitting out noxious ratmen all over the world. It gets some points for having some unique inhabitants. Dragon Age is a setting that I used to not be a huge fan of, but I've really grown accustomed to it due to the stuff that we're doing in our own games. And it is a notable example of its own version of an underworld. In an example a little bit similar to Warhammer Fantasy, it was created by the dwarves to connect their kingdoms, and it's called the Deep Roads. Only, in a somewhat similar fashion to Warhammer, it's gotten taken over by monsters. The Darkspawn, the creatures born of blighted mothers, have swarmed it in such numbers they have largely wiped out most dwarven kingdoms, or thaigs. It presumably doesn't stretch all the way across the world because it's connected to the dwarves of Thedas, but it does fill the same story role of these connected ruins filled with monsters and traps. But you see, the Deep Roads aren't even the end of the underworld of Thedas, because there was a DLC in Dragon Age Inquisition called The Descent, where we descend deeper into the Deep Roads. We descend beneath the Deep Roads and find these natural, expansive caverns with a whole underground sea and these strange dwarves who seem like almost hive mind-like, who don't talk about us. But then you go even deeper below that and you find this strange dwarven city that is so deep underground it looks like there is a sky underneath them. It's never explained what's going on with that, if Thedas is hollow in the middle, or if this is just a really deep cavern filled with this mist that covers the depths of it, so the dwarves that live there, the Shabritol, so they think It's a sky underneath them, and that's why the modern day Dragon Age dwarves believe that they will fall into the sky if they see the sky. It's never really explained what's going on down there, but it's like a whole different world. That is not really explored very well, and we don't really understand what's going on. And with the reception that Dragon Age Veilguard had, the setting, the franchise might very well be dead, and we might never know the official answers. So that's very sad. Current World of Warcraft players may be familiar with a few zones introduced in recent expansions. Though the original idea for an entirely underground zone was created in Wrath of the Lich King and was meant to be Azul Nerub, WoW at the time didn't have the technology to create a seamless, uninstanced zone connected to the main continent. So instead of making it instanced, WoW at the time decided to scrap Azul Nerub and turned it into 2 dungeons. Now, if you ask me, I'd rather have had it on a separate map and still have it, but it's not the world we live in. More importantly, recent expansions have finally figured it out and introduced us to Zarlek caverns in Dragonflight, and were quickly followed by an expansion largely focused on the underworld of Khazalgar, with such striking places as Hallowfall or Azj-Kahet, and then finally Harandar in Midnight, which was clearly cut content from The War Within, but hey, I'd rather we get it late than never. But what most people don't seem to know is that these are all supposed to be connected. In the lore of the setting, there exists a place called Ajakir, the underground realm of the Akir, connecting all the places under Old Kalimdor, dug by the ancient insects as their own underground realm. Azul Nerub, Azj-Kahet, and Ankiraj were originally pieces of this realm that became their own empires after the ancient trolls defeated the Akir. I was always a huge proponent of an Ajakir expansion, but given how it's been quartered into small bits over the last few expansions, the whole realm is either forgotten or we will likely never see it as its own expansion. But with all these worlds, in and out of TTRPGs and MMOs, why does every world seem to have them? Is it all because of the Forgotten Realms and D&D, or is there something deeper to it? Well, what if I told you that Earth has its own Underdark too? Well, not the real Earth, at least unless you believe some really shady people. There are people in the real world today that believe the Earth is hollow, and there is a whole other world full of either dinosaurs or an ancient hyper-advanced civilization with superpowers. This is the Hollow Earth, the modern conspiracy idea that there is a bunch of Western European-looking people hiding underground with psychic powers and advanced technology in a place called Agartha. Allegedly, someone found entrances to it in the poles and found an underground lush jungle with its own sun in the middle of it. It's patently untrue, but if the Earth looked like this, it would collapse under its own weight and become a much smaller planet. It's inconsistent with plate tectonics, seismic measurements of what the inside of the Earth looks like, the actual mass of the Earth we can measure. It's fiction, alright? But much like everything else here, it's a very interesting fiction. In my own Warcraft Earth game, I used Hollow Earth as an Underdark. Besides placing Earth's dark elves in there, alongside a jungle full of dinosaurs and dinosaur people, I also put Agartha there. See, the problem with Agartha is it's kind of rooted in white supremacist ideas. So what I did was present Agarthans as these corrupted, twisted shadows of humans, living in barren wastes of their own making, who still believe themselves superior, hiding their true faces under cloaks. And then I really tore the place up. Yeah, I got a lot of inspiration from the old Planet of the Apes. But these modern conspiracy ideas are not even the origin of the concept. We need to look deeper, further into the past, to see where it really started. If we look at the Greek mythology, we will find Hades, the realm of the dead. Modern people like to imagine Hades as some kind of metaphysical realm, some kind of other world. It was called an underworld for a reason. because it was supposed to be literally underground. That's why you had the entrances to it around the world. They weren't portals, they were deep openings in the earth that ancient people believed went all the way to the realm of the dead. Greek mythology was hardly the only one. Ancient Slavs called it Virai, the Sumerians called it Kur, the ancient Israelites called it Sheol. That was before the modern ideas of hell really took root and replaced the same grey waste they used to believe in, as many other civilizations did. It's an easy connection to make if you really think about it. What do you do with dead people? You put them in the ground, but you also want to believe there is an afterlife, so where do the dead people live? Underground, where we put them. Heaven and hell are all relatively new ideas on the scope of our civilization. As you can see, this idea of an underworld, a dark and dangerous place associated with the supernatural, is deeply rooted in our culture. Was Gary Gygax deliberately inspired by these ancient myths when he created the Underdark? Maybe not, but the idea must have at least subconsciously influenced him through all the fiction and literature he consumed when he was younger, as it has influenced dozens of writers since, spreading this concept all across fiction. It's a little like the idea of fae or fairies. Not everyone calls it the same. In some places it's daimones in Greece, or in Japan it's the yokai, but it's the same basic idea. All over the world you will find a similar concept of ancient inscrutable beings that may look harmless and represent the primal world of nature. All of these Underdarks represent our ancient ideas of a hidden world beneath our feet, a world of the dead. I have no doubt missed many examples throughout fiction, through works I either never experienced or which I forgot since, which I will happily hear about in the comments below. But I think I made my point. The Underdark is more than a D&D trope. It's an ancient primordial concept rooted in how we see the world around us without science. That is why it resonates so strongly with us and why it keeps making its way into unrelated works. But we will be wrapping this one up for now, and I want to thank you all once again for your continued support. We still have a long way to go with the channel, and I hope we can continue the growth we had. Maybe I should make more health videos to boost the numbers. Don't forget to like and subscribe or become a member of the channel for early access to videos and eventually maybe member-only polls and such. We'll see how it expands. Meanwhile, my dear hamsterlings, I hope to see you next time.